So I have a question. Is it safe to assume that someone is going to die here? Samura, Uraha, the ninjas, anybody? Like, that makes the most logical sense, right? Doesn't have to go that way, but with the momentum that we have, the build-up, the emphasis for all of these characters, there's kind of an equal share pool of death. The more leaning side, and my money, is personally on Samura dying. To me, that makes the most sense. The lead up towards that idea felt very smooth. And a big part of that smoothness was because both enchanted blades, Samura's and Uraha, were sitting right above Chihiro and Hirohiko. So naturally, one sword would go to the temple and the other to Hirohiko. Split it right down the middle. And this is because Akuri is putting his life on the line. He cannot retrieve both swords, only one. But he got Samura's. And don't get me wrong, I love seeing this all come together. I think it's wonderful. To me, it drives more impact into Samura's death. Or maybe I'm just beating a dead horse. Maybe he doesn't die. Maybe he's a red herring. Maybe Uraha is going to die. But then I'm not really sure how I feel about that. I have faith in Hokuzono to write it out however he wants in a compelling way, and he will do that. But now I'm a little bit confused. And to be honest, I'm happy about that too. I'm glad that it's going a different route, and I'm happy to see it expanded upon in a way that feels very much compelling. So this whole situation hinges on Akuri, right? If he waited 20 extra minutes, he probably could have got both swords, but we don't have the time for that. So instead, he initiates his ability and he's about to try and pull one sword. The idea is to get both Samura and Uraha on the mandala. And the way that we're going to do this, his underlings, the ninjas, were going to manipulate Samura to push him over onto the mandala. That would be the most difficult thing. Samura would not go on his own regard. He's stubborn like that, and he would want to continue fighting and go down with the ship. You get a solid backstory from the ninjas, how they use their family bloodline, the fact that they helped the Karbanabi within the war, how they dedicate their entire lives to serving one person and usually die protecting that person. So they've always been implemented and used as tools. And you get this perspective from Samura, who doesn't actually treat them like tools. He treats them like human beings, like their own individuals. And I like to imagine, just headcanon wise, that maybe Samura never seen them as ninjas to begin with. He wanted them to be actually visible within his life. These are people that aren't meant to kind of exist or take up space. They're kind of just there to serve and protect, to be blind to the common eye. Does that make sense? So to Samura, it's kind of like the reverse. He wants to treat them as equal, as people, and actually see them as human beings rather than just tools to be capitalized on. If that doesn't speak a death flag, I don't know what does, but they want to sacrifice themselves to save Samura and to get him out of this action. Uraha is the one to bait him over to the mandala though, by using Bloodlust. I like the little tweak in Samura's ability, the fact that he can see or sense Bloodlust, and as soon as Uraha activates that, he's straight over to his position trying to slice him down. Of course, right on top of the mandala, so he's been baited, and within a blink of an eye, they're teleported down to the bottom of the temple. Samura, Uraha, and Hakuri. As they're contemplating on running and escaping, Hakuri wakes up, and he gives Samura his sword back, Tobimune, also known as Crow. Now, what do you think a crow's sword would look like? That's right, a bunch of black feathers, and that's exactly what this is. The entire temple, the battlefield, is cascaded with a bunch of black feathers just coming out of nowhere. And you get this gorgeous panel of Samura appearing out of these feathers and slicing everyone within the battlefield. Kind of looks like the feathers are also doing it, but maybe Samura's like teleporting between the feathers. It's difficult to tell. Maybe he's just that quick. But he is back. And I just want to reiterate, as soon as he gets the sword, the distance between where they are at the bottom of the temple to where the actual fight is happening is a pretty big distance for a blind fella. He gets there instantly. So I don't know if he flew up there with the sword and he's just really fast, or if he teleported or speed-stepped through the feathers. I don't know. Regardless, he has his enchanted blade back, and the visual aesthetic for it is absolutely gorgeous. Of course, he's here to save his ninjas, the people that he cares about, the people that he's built a relationship and a bond with. And while that ends off the chapter, it kickstarts what could be the finale of his character, the last fight for Samura. So we should address the elephant within the room, right? Hakuri is knocked out. He kind of sacrificed a big chunk of his brain to be able to get one of these swords back, and it happened as instant as we knew it would, but still, it's kind of a difficult thing to swallow. We needed both of those swords, and if the situation was different and there was a little bit more time, it would have been easy. But we have one. Issue is that this one is in a very peculiar location, and that is this temple. And this temple is currently getting bombarded with the entire attack force of the Hishaku. I say entire, but it's more like 95%. There is other named Hishaku members that have not shown up yet, and we don't know if they're going to show up. The one that we have here, Hatshaku, is definitely a problem, and now we might actually get to see a fight. So even the idea of killing Samura without his sword was kind of difficult to swallow. While it made sense logically, of course everyone still wanted to see him use his abilities. He's a master swordsman, he's scary, and now that we see him, you know why. I'm sure the Hatshaku guy is a little bit nervous and scared as well, but he has an entire attack force, and now he can probably go all out as well. Now that's what you would think, but the Hishaku don't really have members to spare. The named members. They don't like to take big risks if it puts themselves in danger, at least so far. Regardless of that, I can still see a massive fight happening here. The fact that we have the sword back means we have to show it off, right? And the only way that we can show off what it's truly capable of is someone of at least a decent caliber that can survive, which most likely Hatshaku is currently here. I guess the question now is, if Samura dies, how does he lose? I would say this would be a perfect time to show just how scary the Hishaku can be. We know they're strong, we know they're capable, but we don't know how scary they are, and they need to start building a bit more of an impact for themselves. We're still early within this story, so we gotta set the foundation for what they actually represent power-wise, right? This would put them on the radar. Legendary swordsman with an enchanted blade killed in action against the Hishaku, and not because of all of the members that they threw at this castle, but because of Hatshaku. Now I don't think Hatshaku is going to have an easy time. I wouldn't be surprised if another named Hishaku member comes to play, or we start using stones with the named Hishaku, which would be kind of crazy. Regardless, I think the fight is going to be massive and experimental, but probably the death of Samura. But what about Hirohiko and Uraha? Well, that's the biggest mystery in the air. So because Samura has his sword back now, there's only one sword sitting above Chihiro and Hirohiko. So now we have to get into the more uncomfortable territory of that if Samura doesn't actually die, maybe it's Uraha. And you're probably sitting there like, well, what if they just both don't die and they both get their swords back? I haven't really thought of that option because I think that's very overpowered for them to have two swords. I think the Hishaku, to be emphasized of having an impact of this caliber, they need to at least have one sword. And if they're getting Samura's, that means Samura dies fighting Hatshaku and his sword gets stolen. But maybe that explains the whole situation with Hirohiko's arms. A lot of you were telling me, oh, he doesn't have his arms, they've been cut off, yes. But I always kind of just assumed that he could actually grow them back. Use his ability or heal them rapidly, I don't know. The assumption falls on the fact that he's a sorcerer and a very aggressive and adaptable learning one, so he seemed willing to continue fighting, declaring a death battle against Chihiro within this moment and having those two swords planned. So even without his arms, he seemed confident that he still was going to fight. So unless his arms would turn into like paper arms and he could wield the swords like that, but then you lose your sorcery when you get a contract with the sword, so it's like, what are we doing? You can't double or triple dip into wielding, a sword. Do you wield it without the contract, which I don't think would really provide any benefit to Hirohiko. He's good, but he's not as good as Chihiro and all of the abilities that he has, even if he is injured. So where do we go? Is a murky situation now, because I don't know how Hirohiko gets out of it. What stops him from being killed right now? Does someone try and save him? Has he planned for this situation? Did he plan for his arms to get cut off? See, I have all of these questions in my head and not enough connections or, viable answers to provide something. But it's only for Hirohiko. Everything else seems like it's aligning in a way where it makes sense, but just that situation is an oddball. There's still a lot on the line here. There's death still in the air, but now it's starting to shift a little bit. Samura is still the prime candidate, especially showing off all of his abilities, but Uraha is creeping up just a little bit more. And while I personally think it makes more sense to kill off Samura and have Uraha chase after his sword, as like, I'm going to revenge my master and and get his sword back, which sounds really cool. Joining Chihiro makes sense. I don't know how that would actually lead to Hirohiko then, because Hirohiko can't use Samuro's sword if the Hatshaku wins right now, unless they have a way to teleport it between them, which would be a crazy reveal, but again, kind of like a backwards way to go about it. Regardless of how this situation turns out and the speculation and the theory crafting and just how everything's coming together, I think it's beautiful regardless. It's an incredible reading experience. It has a lot of beautiful artistry behind it. Hokuzono is cooking, and I'm bracing myself for a pretty major death on any front, really. That little flashback we got with Samura and his ninjas felt powerful, and while very brief, has a lot of leverage to him sacrificing himself for the lives of his friends. That's the type of person he is. It plays an opposite to those ninjas, allowing them to be free and even potentially serving Uraha. Before we get there though, you best believe we're going to see a beautiful showcase of this sword's ability. And the author seems to like drawing this sword specifically, because from what I've seen, his previous one-shot has this exact same sword. The black crow, bird feathers, the literal exact same design and everything. So I would expect to see this sword be commonly used, and maybe it's by Hirohiko within the future. We could still have the student chasing after his master's sword to get revenge and potentially trying to fight Hirohiko, but I don't know how Hirohiko gets the sword or even escapes the situation that he's in, and until we figure that out, right now, all eyes are on Samura to truly show us how a legendary swordsman uses an enchanted blade.